What is up, everybody? So, my name is Mason. So, I know you guys have been listening to me for quite some time, but I figured I should just give you guys a bit of background as to who I actually am, right? So, I grew up in Polokwane, born, raised there, majority of, my early years, right? And, in terms of my journey in entrepreneurship, people wonder, like, what keeps you going? What keeps you fired up? What keeps you pushing, right? Because I had a young lady message me about a week ago, and she was like, why do you keep doing what you're doing? Why do you keep pushing, right? And I was like, it's all perspective based, right? So from a very young age, I've been fortunate enough to have, had a family that was split, right? So my parents never got married. I was raised majority of the time by my mother's side of the family, but every now and again, my father's side of the family would pick me up every second weekend, right? So my grandfather from my mom's side was very wealthy man. I mean, he had 8 cars, a huge house where I hardly played outside. I'd run up and down inside. But when it came to my mom's side of the family, there was a bit of lack, a bit of struggle, being conscious about the money in the house and stuff like that. So I think from the age of 6, I was always aware of it and I always noticed it. And luckily, from my dad's side of the family, my grandfather would always take me to like his farm. He would take me to site and so on. Through that, I started understanding and developing this love for business, right? Where I saw the contrast in life on both spectrums, right? So it was like, if you're a business owner, you're more in control of your time, you have a lot more freedom, you have a lot more choices. But when you are now having a job, right, you can be jobless for quite some time. You're working on someone else's schedule and someone else's plan and timeline. So from a very young age, I've always wanted to be in business, right? And just having that opposite, that contrast within life is what fueled me, because from a young age I always used to dream like crazy dreams, right? From a young age I've always wanted to have a business that was international. I could operate internationally, earn in foreign currency. I've always wanted to look the way I do, right? So it wasn't something that just started out very late. I've always wanted to be in shape, right? So I've always had this knowing, and the thing that came from me wanting to be in shape was because I got bullied. I got bullied a lot in school. So I went to a law school and I was always bullied, right? Very tiny, scrawny, and everyone else was a lot bigger. So I wanted to be bigger from the age of 13, 14, right? In terms of business, because I had that contrast growing up, I always wanted to have more, right? So for me, the thought of business is the thought of freedom, the thought of abundance, creating systems that will create more and more and more and not really be restricted, right? So there's always different contrast. And that's the thing about perspective. When you look at the driving force for me getting into shape, some people would think initially my driving force was just to look good. No, my driving force was to get as big as the other kids where they wouldn't mess with me, right? So that's where it stemmed from. So even when I started my training journey, I started at the age of 17. I never said I'm going to do this thing and quit. I've always wanted to gain weight. I've always wanted to have like an athletic Hollywood type body. So for me, it was a thing of I will do this thing until I get it right. And for 7 years, I struggled. For 7 years, my body hardly changed, or I got results that I really didn't want. But I just committed to the fact that eventually I will get it right. Right. So when I started building my body again in 2020, the only resolution I had was, consistency. That's the only thing I prayed for. I said, Lord, please bless me with consistency this year. Right. And what happens when when you ask for strength, you get problems. When you ask for wisdom, you get problems. When you ask for consistency, you get challenges that will test the consistency, right? So I started at the beginning of the year. Then, as I started training, I was very consistent in the gym. The first 3 months, lockdown hits, right? Lockdown hits, and I'm like, I asked for consistency. This is just another challenge to test my consistency. So I started training at home, right? I would put books in my book bag, start doing squats, weighted squats with my bag. I'd do pull ups outside in the parking. And I tried literally everything to remain consistent until I was able to get back into the gym around the 9th of October at the end of 2020, right? But by being consistent the whole year, even though I wasn't in the gym, my body did change drastically, right? To a point where when I started in the gym, I was like, if I was committed from the beginning of the year until now, imagine the following year, right? And then I just kept doing the same thing. I started seeing the increase in weight, my physique changing. I was like, damn, this is actually so insane. And I remember back in 2017, one of my friends that I used to train with, phenomenal guy, right? So he was one of the first guys that told me, he said, dude, this thing of you being inconsistent 3 months on, 3 months off is setting you back, right? Because if you're just consistent for one whole year, you're setting the foundation for yourself for the following year, right? And as much as we were talking about the gym then, I feel like it applies to so many spheres of life. If you start working on yourself now, you're setting the foundation for yourself next year. If you start building a business now, you start setting a foundation to continue to build upon next year. If you stop, start, right? You will never master anything. So when I took that element from gym and I started applying it in my business life, I started applying it in the other spheres of life, personal development. You know, personal development is so key. That's working on yourself. When I started reading books, if I did a stop start, I work on myself for 3 months and then I stop. Work on myself for 3 months and then I stop. I wouldn't really see much change, right? But if I took it and I was like, you know what, I'm going to treat personal development, my own personal growth, much similar to how I treat the gym now, you know, building the habits. I said, the way I think this year, I'm building my mindset this year to have a stronger mindset next year, right? Because I always tell people anything that you start with, anything that you want to start with, starts in here first, your mindset, right? And it is so powerful because I remember there was a time when I started my business, I was still a student studying a BSc in construction economics at Wits. And it just took me making 375 Rand where I dropped out of university to pursue my business full time, right? And people were like, dude, how do you do that? How did you master up the strength to chase something that you enjoy? I said, I first started, I tried. I realized it's something I really love, right? And then when I just made 375 Rand, it just showed me that it's possible. So I live in a world of possibility, perspective. Some people viewed it as this is too little money to base your future on. I said, yes. To me, it's little now, but what could it become, right? So when I dropped out, I remember my first year, right? Everyone was asking me, like, oh my gosh, you're so great. Oh my gosh, how did you master up the courage? But they don't understand the other side to it, where it was like when I saw my mates graduating, the amount of anxiety that would hit me, right? And I had to look at it from a different perspective. I was like, you know, some of the people that were graduating were really unhappy. I was like, I'm fired up every day. I love what I'm doing. So my perspective towards what was happening at first was anxiety. And then in the second year, when another group were graduating, I felt nothing completely. And then now the third year, I'm just like, oh, shout out, congratulations, you graduated, right? But in the beginning, the anxiety attacks, the uncertainty, the questioning yourself, the doubt, but committing, right? Committing was the biggest thing because a lot of young people ask me now, they're like, you know, should I drop out of school? And I say the fact that you have to ask me that question just means that you're really not ready for it, right? Because if you have to ask, should I drop out? It means that you're kind of looking for someone to give you an out on a decision that you should be making yourself. Because if someone gives you a definite decision to that, it just means that if it backfires or if you're not willing to do what is required of you, you're going to be able to point a finger and say, but that person told me to drop out. So I always give a very neutral answer because when I dropped out, I only told my parents once it was done, right? Once it was done. No, you shouldn't have. I said, it's done. There's nothing else that we can do about it right now, right? But if you're still in school, if you're still in that job and you're asking yourself, should I quit? Ask yourself this question. Are you willing to deal with the consequences and repercussions? Are you willing to deal with the loneliness that comes with it, right? The one thing I noticed was the moment I wasn't in school anymore, my social circles changed completely, right? I spent a lot of time alone, and I was like, I was ready for that because most of my teens I spent around a lot of people. And because I spent around a lot of people, it was like I was never truly within myself, understanding what it is that I personally want, right? So when it came to me understanding that there's going to be periods where I'm alone, there's going to be periods where there's a disconnect because proximity has changed completely, right? So that is a different perspective to it. Yes, we have dreams, we have goals, but are you willing to commit to it, right? And I always look at, my mom as an example. My mom was in school, got an opportunity to work for SAA, and she's always wanted to travel. She's always been this big spirit, right? And at a blink, she decided, this is what I'm going to do. She's going to work for SAA, and she started traveling the world, right? And within that opportunity, a lot of people saw it as, but you could have studied, you could have been so much more. But she was happy traveling the world. She was happy, right, being able to take her son to different countries. I've been to Brazil, I've been to Senegal, I've been to Hong Kong, I've been to the UK, right? And in all those experiences, even though we didn't come from much, it just gave me a different perspective on life. It showed me how other people around the world are living. It showed me how big the world is, how advanced technology is, how advanced societies are, how poverty stricken some countries are, where we think we might have it bad. It was like when I went to Senegal. It's a beautiful country, but we always think that something outside of our current situation might be better, right? And when I got there, I was like, first of all, it's so hot. I said, I'm so grateful because even the sun in Limpopo isn't as hot as, Senegal. I got there, I'm like, it's so hot. I only leave the house after 5 p.m. You know, I thought that, the infrastructure would be much better. South Africa has great infrastructure. And I really started appreciating where I came from, because a lot of times when we grow up, we see what life is like through the lens of the television, the perspective of the television, right? What people show us, which isn't necessarily reality. So when I started going to all these other places, I remember I was in Brazil and I was in Sao Paulo. Beautiful, beautiful hotel. Um, Great experience, right? And I'd walk and the infrastructure was beautiful. And then we took a bus ride and we're riding past the favelas, right? And I was like, I could not believe what I actually saw. I was humbled by that experience. And I was like, you know what? I really love where I'm from, but I'm going to take the experience. So when I got back from Brazil, the Tivoli Hotel, beautiful hotel, I turned my room into like a hotel experience because I was like, my situation might not be where I want to be right now, but I can make it a lot better, right? So I had a different perspective on my room, my space, just based off what I experienced in another country, right? So having that perspective, there was always this knocking like, if you can travel overseas, you could definitely have business overseas. And that's why when, I started in my business, the fact that I could deal in 98 different countries blew my mind. I was like, whoa, I think this is genuinely what I've been looking for, right? So the perspective was, even though people told me that, dropping out of school to pursue this business just after making 375 Rand was a crazy idea. For me, it was like, this is what I've been looking for. All I needed to know was that it works. So 375 Rand to me was a tester to show that it works, right? So always having a different perspective on life is so key because different people experience life differently. There's only one you. There can never be a duplicate of you, a copycat. There are clones, but they'll never have your essence, right? And your experience cultivate your life's lenses, right? So that's always one thing to keep in mind, especially when you're dealing with other people, right? I used to be this very young, aggressive, tense young man, right? And then the more I experience life, the more personal development I do, the more I experience different people. I started realizing like everyone approaches something from their perspective, right? So you're not fighting the person, you're fighting their perspective. So that's why, especially in relationships, when you're dealing with a matter, you're dealing with perspectives, not the person themselves. The person themselves is someone that you have an affinity towards, you've developed a bond with them, but on a particular matter where your ideals clash, it's all perspective based, right? So you always want to look at, how was someone raised? What were their habits growing up? Certain circumstances that has shaped their perspective on life, that has shaped their perspective towards relationships, that have shaped their perspective towards money, that have shaped their perspective towards business, that have shaped their perspective towards faith, right? It's all past experiences. So always look at that. I feel like the moment I really realized that, the feeling of entitlement that I might have had, right? The feeling of wanting someone to view me as right, the feeling of feeling like I'm entitled to something started to like fade away because I started realizing, it's all perspective based. You know what I mean? So life has different perspectives, the way you engage with different people. You could engage with someone on a positive note and someone else engages that person on a negative note. It's all perspective based on experience, right? So I want you guys to always pay attention to how you deal with life, your perspective, and understand that there's many perspectives to one situation, and always work on shifting your lens, right? So one of the things that I do, especially in, not growing up, not really having money, we were okay, but not really having money. So those habits then trickle down because your kids don't watch what you say, they watch what you do and your feelings towards and reactions towards certain things, right? What I do is a lot of my acquaintances are much further than me in life. From I think the age of 20, a lot of my acquaintances were like 32, 33, 34, multi-millionaires, super successful. And because of that, every time I'd interact with them, they'd give me a different perspective on life. They'd give me a different perspective on business. They'd give me a different perspective on relationships to help improve me from an experience point of view. And my mentor always says, be a student, not a follower. As much as someone tells you something, right? It's your job to take in that information, break it down, and see what parts fit your life and where you can improve. Because if you're just a follower, if someone just says, do this, do this, do this, do this, and you follow to the T, to some extent, yes, it is good to be a follower. You can't be a successful leader without being a great follower, right? But always discern, is the advice that I'm getting, is this perspective that I'm getting in alignment with where I want to get to, where I'm going, and who I want to become, right? Because there's a lot of times where I can sit and listen to someone and listen to their advice. And I dissect it and I'm like, okay, this part is applicable to my life. This part, that is not my portion. I am not like this. I'm not going to behave like this. And that ties into self identity, right? Understanding yourself. You really understand yourself when you spend a lot more time alone, right? I used to think spending time alone was frustrating or was boring. I used to get sad. My friends don't invite me to things. But in hindsight, now looking back, it was actually the biggest blessing because I got to understand myself a lot more. I got comfortable being by myself. I got comfortable with my thoughts. I got comfortable chilling and dreaming. I got comfortable, doing introspection. And only now, looking back at the time that it was happening, I was frustrated, thinking, no, my friends probably don't feel me as much. They don't see me. But now that I'm older, I'm like, I'm so grateful that happened, right? So everything is perspective and it depends on the lens that you look at it through. And one of the biggest things that I'd always say is let people come to their own logical conclusions. I got this at one of our major trainings of the year. We had an international guest within our business training us. And he was like, let people come to their own logical conclusions. That's why I was like, the way I live my life, at first I'd get frustrated when people don't do the things that I want them to do. They don't move a certain way that I want them to move. But when I heard that, it completely switched everything for me. Let people come to their own logical conclusions. All you can do is advise and you can set an example, but you can't make someone do something that they're not willing to do, right? It's like someone tells me they want to get in shape. I say, okay, you have to do X, Y, Z because that's the path that I went through. I've spent 7 years struggling, not getting results. This is a trial and tested method, right? And then they don't want to do it. I can't force you to get into shape. I know what drives me to get into shape and stay in shape, right? So you always let people come to their own logical conclusions. So it also comes down to business, a matter of price, right? My product might be at a certain price and this product is down here. But if I convey to you the value that you get, right? You tell me you want a transformation. I say, okay, this is the program best suited for your goals. You're going to get X, Y, Z. And they tell me, hey, there's this product on the market, but it's at this price. I say, okay, great. I don't argue with anyone. I don't fight with anyone. I don't try and negotiate because I know the value at which I bring when I get into business with you and I deal with you. Here, I cannot argue or debate because I have nothing, I have no comment, nothing to say. I don't know anything about, this specific product. But it all comes down to that person. What do they want? Do they want the value or do they want the lower price? Right? Do they want the result or do they want the trial and error? Right? So it's all perspective based. And I think the most powerful thing that my uncle said to me on Saturday, we were driving from the airport home. And I said to him, I was like, this road has so much traffic during the afternoon. He was like, yeah, that's just when like companies are out. And I'm like, true. He was like, it's so crazy. You come an hour earlier and the road is completely clear. You come an hour later and you're stuck in traffic for yet another hour, adding another hour to your trip. So it was like, it's all up to you based on what time you want to come here. And I was like, that's so crazy. Usually you might be thinking of starting that business and you think it's not the right time for you right now. But you ask yourself, you can either be early, a month, a day, a year early, or you could be a month, a day late, right? So whatever idea that you have right now, start, implement, go for it, get going, go to the gym, get in shape, work on your mind, right? Develop relationships, learn how to network, read, listen to podcasts that feed your mind, go out there, live life, go on that experience, but start now. Because you can either be doing it now, you can be an hour too early, which saves you the hassle, or you can be an hour too late, right? So the choice is always yours. That's it from me. Thank you for tuning in. Let's go. Let's rock. Fire me up. Hey, hey, I'm so fresh. I'm so fly. Hey, I look good. I look